Nobody sat you down and said, "Here is what to do when your mind turns on you. Here is what to do when grief shows up and doesn't leave. Here is what to do when you feel everything and understand nothing." They taught you long division. They taught you the water cycle. And then they sent you out into a life full of pain and expected you to figure the rest out on yourself. And somehow, you did. Sort of. You developed your own system. Distract yourself. Push through. Pretend you're fine until you almost are. And on the days that didn't work, you assumed the problem was you, not the missing tools. You. That's the thing nobody ever said out loud. The emotional tools that could have saved you years of suffering were never taught to you. Not because they don't exist, but because no one thought you needed to know. Think about that for a second. Somewhere, these tools exist. Psychologists have them. Therapists use them. They're written in books, practiced in offices, proven in research. And yet somehow, they never made it to you. Not in school, not from your parents, who themselves were never taught. Not from anyone who loved you, because they were also just improvising. In her book, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before?, Dr. Julie Smith, a clinical psychologist, makes a point that stopped me cold. She says the gap between what people need to know to protect their mental health and what they actually know is enormous. And that gap costs people years, sometimes decades. Years spent suffering through something that had a name, a solution, a way through. Here's where things get interesting. When most people feel low, really low, their instinct is to wait it out, to hide from the world and hope the feeling passes. And sometimes it does. But sometimes, without knowing it, the hiding becomes the problem. Every time you avoid the thing that makes you anxious, your brain logs it as evidence that the thing was dangerous. You feel safer in the short term, and more afraid in the long run. So every time you tried to protect yourself, you made it harder. That's not weakness. That's a brain doing exactly what brains do when they haven't been given better instructions. Think about the last time your mood crashed without warning. Not because of one big thing, but because of nothing, really. A gray afternoon, a quiet room, a conversation that left you feeling slightly hollow. And you didn't know what to do with that, so you reached for your phone, or food, or sleep, or anything that wasn't the feeling itself. What if you'd been taught, early, clearly, practically, that moods move, that they rise and fall like weather, and that your job isn't to control the weather, it's to stop believing that the rain will last forever. That one shift, just that, could have changed entire chapters of your life. There's a specific kind of pain that lives in this gap, not the pain of something terrible happening to you, the pain of suffering longer than you had to, because nobody handed you the map. The exhaustion of solving in your 30s what someone could have taught you at 15. The quiet grief of looking back and wondering who you might have been if you'd had the words sooner. That grief doesn't have a name, but you know exactly what it feels like. Dr. Smith talks about the relationship between thoughts and feelings. How a thought is not a fact. How the story your mind tells you at 2 a.m. is not the truth about your life. This sounds simple, but when you're inside it, when the thought feels like certainty, nobody ever taught you to question it. Nobody ever said, your mind is not always your ally. Sometimes it's just scared. What would change if you'd known that at 22? Here's the uncomfortable part. A lot of the coping mechanisms you built, the ones that feel like strength, they're protecting you from something that isn't there anymore. The walls that made sense once. The self-sufficiency that became isolation. The toughness that made it impossible to ask for help. What you were calling resilience had, somewhere along the way, become armor, and the two had been tangled together so long you couldn't tell them apart. That's not an attack. That's just what happens when you're handed a storm and told to handle it with no tools. You become resourceful, creative, you survive. And then the survival strategies outlast their usefulness, and you're left carrying weight that was never yours to carry alone. The point isn't to blame anyone. Your parents improvised too. Their parents before them. Generation after generation, handing down silence around the very things that needed words. The point is, the tools exist now. You have access to them now. And knowing that, really knowing it, means the next chapter doesn't have to look like the last one. So here's the question I want to leave you with. You go back to that moment. The gray afternoon, the hollow conversation, the midnight spiral, and this time you know what it is. You have the words. You have the tools. You know the feeling will pass. You know the thought isn't a fact. You know you are not broken. Who were you before the years of not knowing wore you down? And more importantly, who are you now that you do? If this resonated with you, Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before? By Dr. Julie Smith is genuinely worth your time. It reads like a conversation with someone who finally says the things you needed to hear. If you want more essays like this one, Sparkpage is where they live. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.